All right, we are on episode number 21. We've got 20 behind us. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. Roger and I are going to transition. He has a tremendous amount of experience in supporting folks over in Europe, and he's built this presentation that you've given multiple times. Is that how many times do you think you've given this presentation?
Oh, at least 20. It's because I'm cheap. I don't charge anything for
it. So we're going to transition over to a live Teams meeting type operation where we can share the pictures while Roger can narrate it.
In one of our previous episodes, one of the later ones that we did, I think we ended up in Poland, and this is a PowerPoint presentation of my main work in Poland. Alex Bohanski was the host that wanted to become Sweet Corn King of Poland. I said, they don't grow corn in Poland. He said, well, we did in our garden. So I said, okay, we'll see what we can do. So I said, you have to have a plant that has some steam jacketed kettles, and you have to have some freezing capabilities. So he found a plant in Jezerany, which is in northern Poland near the North Sea. And I have this PowerPoint deal. I'll go through it one slide at a time and try to explain what's going on. Alex was in any kind of business he could make a few dollars. He was in the artificial insemination business. He was in used equipment business. And these are businesses that Norval Dvorak, the fellow that got me started overseas, that we talked about in previous episodes, he got Alex started, but none of the businesses that Alex got involved with were really money-making deals. This is a picture of Alex with Jeannie. Jeannie happened to have the same birthday as my wife, who had passed away 10 weeks earlier, so I thought that was a good omen. This is the car that Alex didn't have a car. He didn't have anything. He didn't have a car, didn't have a telephone. All he had is an idea to be Sweet Corn King of Poland. This is his mother-in-law's car, and I was almost bigger than the car. They picked me up at the airport. Zasha, Alex's wife, sat on my suitcase in the back seat, and I sat in the front seat with Alex's mother-in-law. This is Alex's home in Sky Body. The population of Sky Body was 37 people. It was 35, but the 35 was crossed out, and now it was 37. I said, Alex, the driveway is terrible. He said, well, we fix it once a year. I said, is that scheduled for tomorrow? Because it was muddy. You had to get a running start in order to get through the muddy section of it. Here is Alex's house. They had a dirt floor in the back hall. They had a big pan of butter on the kitchen table. They had one cow, and they churned their own butter. I helped fix these bikes. They had a three-legged dog. And Antek, who is now running the firm in Poland, was 8 years old at the time. And here's their family, a lovely family. We got Marie, yours truly, Zasha, Clementine, Olga, Vivi, Antek, and Jeannie. They had one child after this, Tatiana, so they had 7 kids. Just a lovely family. I got there the first year, and they didn't have anything. And I came home, and I said to my sister, here's $100. See what you can buy, a little bit of something for every one of the kids. And I told them the ages. So she bought a Timex watch for Zasha, and she bought a makeup kit for Marie. She bought a Barbie doll for Clementine and Olga. And she bought a set of Legos for the boys. And that's a little gift that we gave them to get them on my side. Here, I got some Dean paraphernalia. These are Dean hats. And somebody at Dean says, who's going to pay for these gifts? I said, I'm not going to pay. This is advertising. We're going to be advertising in Poland. So they had Dean hats on. And here's Antek and their cow. That cow didn't look like it was very well nourished, but Antek was 8 years old at the time. And that was in 1993. And like I said, he's now running the firm, or at least running the firm with his dad. I wanted to see the cornfield. You remember I said that I gave Alex 50 pounds of corn seed to plant, and he planted this, and I was very disappointed because it was a terrible looking field. And they had different varieties planted in the same field intermittently. I mean, you couldn't pick out a variety, which the company that we were going to pack corn for wanted. They wanted a Jubilee variety, but he had various varieties in this field. I walked out of the field, it was kind of dusk, and I fell head over heels. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I got 2 electric wires stretched around the field to keep the wild hogs out." And I stumbled on those wires going out of the field. Here's Bishek was his right-hand man. Bishek lived in this house, giant house. And I got there on Friday, and we had to make some equipment. We had to make some equipment to cut cobs because we were going to produce corn on a cob on Monday, and this was Friday. So this is the machine shop at Bishek, and that's the tool that we had. There was a jointer, a table saw, and here's Alex. He's drilling some holes. I don't know if he knows what he's doing, but he's drilling some holes in some wood. What I tried to make and did make is a glorified paper cutter. We bought some machete-type knives in the store, punched a hole in the end, made a framework to support the knife, and ended up with a glorified paper cutter with a half of a PVC pipe that was 13 centimeters long. The company that we were supplying corn to wanted cobs that were 13 centimeters long. So I cut a piece of 2-inch PVC pipe in half on their table saw and then cut it 13 centimeters long, and I fastened that to my paper cutter. And here I am punching a hole. This is Sunday afternoon. And there's my patent applied for. You can't see it too well here, but I would would husk the cobs, and I would put the cobs in that saddle, cut one end off, and then turn the cob around and cut the other end off to get the 13 centimeters. Here was our husking crew, and they thought they would husk. I had asked for 20 women and 4 ton of corn or 5 ton of corn for Monday morning. And this is what we came to. I said, we aren't going to husk all this corn. We're going to husk it. We're going to cut it. We're going to cook it. We're going to cool it. We're going to have a production line. And they all started laughing. And I said, Alex, they're talking about me. What are they saying? He said, you be here one more week, they all be dead. Then they all laughed, and away we went. Here's my paper cutter. I cut 7,000 cobs of corn that day, both ends. So I cut 14,000 cuts. I said to Alex, you got to take over. He said, I'm left-handed. I can't use that cutter. I said, we'll make a left-handed one for you tomorrow. I got hungry, so I said to him, I need something to eat. So he went downtown or to the store and got some Braunschweiger and a couple of rolls, and there's one of my machetes, and I had a Coke, and I sat down and got something to eat. Here's this 2 steam-jacketed kettles. I bought a bottle of Hylex to make the hands of the people that are working on the corn sanitary. I got some rubber gloves, and they'll dip their hands in the pan of diluted Hylex, and that's how our quality control started. And here's our cook. She was our chief cook. We filled up the steam-jacketed kettle. I said I wanted it cooked 9 minutes. So she would serve the corn and cook it for 9 minutes. Then we'd run out of coal. We had a vertical boiler there, and these pieces of coal were as big as your head. But that's what we use for steam generation. And here's a modern broom made out of sticks, but did a pretty good job. That's one of the workers, and she was cleaning up the corn husk from. Now, Alex, I think I told you in a previous film, he was supplying fresh corn to 16 spots in Warsaw. They would pick the corn, cut both ends of the cob off, and leave about 2/3 of the leaves on the cob and show kernels on 1/3 of it. And he would bring these to these vendors at 16 different locations and charge them 35 cents a cob. You deliver it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I said, you can't, and he said, whatever corn you had left, I'd buy back. I said, you can't do that. I said, they have to wash it out. They have to lower the price of something. You can't afford to buy that corn back. This was a Zuck truck. They had just put a rebuilt engine in it the night before. And their idea of a car lift was they dug a hole in the ground and they parked the truck over the hole, and they went down in the hole, and that was their car lift. Got in the truck at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was cold, and I looked, and there was a hole in the floorboard 6 inches big. So I put my briefcase over the hole, and we made it to Warsaw. Here I am. testing my wares in a Kentucky Fried Chicken. They're the company that the Kentucky Fried Chicken opened up their first restaurant in Warsaw on August 17th, 1993. I was there on September 23rd, and we delivered corn, I think, on the 25th or 26th. And I told the buyers of Kentucky Fried Chicken that we would supply better quality corn than they were using. They were only in business for 1 month before we got there, and they had corn from Hungary, which was almost like field corn. It wasn't very sweet, wasn't very tasty. So I said, let us compare our corn with your corn. He said, well, I can't find any samples of our corn now. I said, you don't want to compare it with ours because we're going to beat the quality. Here again, I was kind of brash, but I saw an opportunity to show that we could do a better job. So on that truck that you saw before, we had 1,100 cobs of frozen corn. We had produced it on Monday, put it in a room full of frozen rabbits and frozen chickens, and the corn really wasn't froze. The corners of the cases were wet, but we went to Warsaw with our 1,100 cobs of corn, and I said to Alex, we have to get it in the freezer real quick before they unthaw the little bit that had been frozen. And we went back on Thursday, and all that corn was gone. I said to Alex, we got them, now we have to keep them. And fortunately, we've kept that business and expanded it since that first 1,100 cobs that were delivered in 1993. I told Alex we had to find a better place to produce corn. I said we have to go farther south, and it has to be a bigger facility. So we produced 8 tons of corn that first year, believe it or not. 8 tons of corn was about 20,000 cobs. And he said, I found a place in Włocławek. Włocławek is about 150 kilometers west of Warsaw. I said, I'll come and take a look. So I flew to Poland, took a look at the plant. Plant was operated by communist people that had been operated before the Iron Curtain came down. The Iron Curtain came down in 1989. This was 1993, 4 years later, but they still had the same management team at this plant. This plant said we could use their water and their freezing facility, but we really couldn't put our operation in the plant. So we said, well, we'll put up our equipment on the outside of the plant. Here's the plant manager and the quality control person. I got along pretty good with. Our crew lived in a 3rd floor walk-up at 3 rooms. This is the kitchen. And you can imagine 5 guys living in that kitchen doing their own cooking. And you look in the refrigerator and you immediately close the door because nothing looked very good. Went across the street to get some Polish bread, which was good, and get some cereal. That's what we lived on. Here's our crew. There's Alex, my host. There's yours truly, and there's Bishek. Bishek's a good guy. He's Alex's gopher. And here's a young man that helped us with the operation. Here's our bathroom. Quite a bathroom. We changed towels on Wednesday. I used Alex and he used mine. That's the mirror showed the middle of my stomach. I had to bend over to see the mirror, and they had a hose, so you can imagine what that bathroom looked like. They didn't have a solid spout. Here we had a executive field meeting. I said to Alex, we have to get our field people together, and we had 3 growers there, and Alex and myself. And Alex was the interpreter. He could speak English. These 3 growers grew corn for the first year, and we had a meeting to tell them about fertilizer and weed control and so on and so forth. And there were some good farmers. They raised some good crops for us. There's Wojtek. Remember Wojtek, the KFC people were going to come and visit our plant. And I said to Alex, we really aren't ready for a plant visit. Had broken windows in the plant, and we had a lot of work to do. And we really weren't in the plant as such because we had our corn preparation equipment on the driveway. So the Polish, the KFC man came, and I said, Alex said, we're going to have to take him out to a big dinner. I said, he's going to give us 2 hours. That's all he's going to give us. And we would not really like to have him come in the plant. So the buyer came and I said, how much time have you got for us? He said, 2 hours. And I winked at Alex and I said, how about taking a look at our field operation? Yeah, he said, that would be a good idea. He could speak English. And I told Alex to call Wojtek's wife and tell her to get some corn on the cob and some sliced cucumbers and tomatoes and maybe just a bottle of vodka and put on the table. And we would show him the field operation and go from there. So we did that and we had a nice meeting, and he looked at his watch. He said, I have to get back to Warsaw. So he never got into the plant, but now we have a plant that's suitable for anybody to visit. We wanted some way to plant corn and increase the heat that soil had. So we found this planter in France that cost, I think, $20,000 that laid down a sheet of plastic 1 meter wide, and these star wheels on the back of the corn planter would poke a hole in the plastic, and the corn seed would fall in this hole, and when the corn sprouted, it would come up right through the hole. And this is what it looked like when they planted a field. These piles of dirt, the farmer would go and throw a pail full of dirt or a shovel full of dirt on to keep the wind from blowing the plastic away. This plastic was biodegradable, and by next spring it was all gone. You can see the holes where the kernels went in. We had about 3 degrees more temperature as a result of this plastic, which in effect gave us a broader planting schedule. Remember me saying in one of the previous episodes that corn grows above 50 heat unit or 50 degrees, and we would not plant another day's corn until we had enough heat units comparable to the harvest season. So by having plastic, you could actually get variety A and variety B that mature a couple days apart. Here's Wojtek and Bishek and Alex and me that's in the cornfield, and you see the plastic. Now you can see we got some pretty good looking cornfields. There's, I guess that's me. We were husking corn by hand, and that wasn't going to work. So I found this husker in Illinois for $3,500, and I shipped it to Poland DHL. And this is the next year now. I got there on Friday again, and on Saturday and Sunday we worked. We put the line together, and Monday morning we were running corn. And here's my crew. They look kind of motley, but they were a good crew. I would take pictures of them with my camera, and then the next time I came, I would give them a glossy print of their picture. And I remember the machine shop guy, I said, picture, picture. He said, moment. He opened up his locker, and he had a little piece of polished aluminum in his locker, and he parted his hair, got a picture taken, and I gave him a picture. Here's our operation with the one husker, and this is replacing my paper cutter. I went to a machine shop on the Russian-Polish border with 30 slides, a flip chart, and some Sharpie pens. And I spent 3 hours with the machine shop operator, and I said, this is what we want. We want a cob saw that's going to be automatic, where we have flights on it, where women put the corn in the pockets, and saws will come and saw both ends of the cob off. Here's we're ready to press the inauguration button. And I jerry-rigged all this stuff by going to the boneyard of Poland. We got a conveyor to go up to the huskers, and we picked the corn in bags strapped on the waist of people picking the corn. Then you put it in wire-sided pallets. And I saw this side dump wagon on the way to the airport, and I called Alex. I said, that's what we should use. I said, use one of those grain trucks for hauling your corn. And subsequently, we arranged that we could dump the corn right from that vehicle into the conveyor. Now, like I said, this is outside the plant. They let us go inside the plant. We're husking the corn. Now, here's the women putting the corn in the cups, all stainless steel cups. And here there's a saw. I went to Sears Roebuck and bought 2 carbide tip saw blades. You can see them here. some people said, what about OSHA? Well, you can see the teeth on the blade. You know it's not running. We just lifted up the cover, take a picture, and then we put the cover back. But this machine would handle several hundred cobs a minute, as many as you could put in the conveyor, and it would saw both ends of the cob off. Then we'd take the cobs and put them in water, and that was our semi-wash to try to get some of the silk off of it. And then we had 9 steam jacketed kettles there, and we made these scoops, which is a terrible job to scoop the corn in and out of those steam jacketed kettles. The Polish women are just great. They can, if you want to move a piece of equipment, they just move it. Strong women. Now, after the cooking, we didn't have any tunnel to freeze the corn in, or one that was available. We put them in racks, and we put them in a cold room. This was just a dead space that had cold air blowing in it, and you could freeze the corn in about 24 hours. Now we're packing the corn for KFC. That was a couple of years later. Now we have the crew from KFC, and we're ready to show them inside the plant. Here's the buyer from KFC. There's yours truly and Alex and some other people. And here's our rodent control program. We had a cat, and everybody brought food and milk for the cat, so I don't think the cat ever caught a mouse, but at least that was our rodent control program. Now, the next year, we ran 26 ton the second year. The third year, we had 58 ton. I found another Husker in Minnesota, went there with a truck, picked it up, shipped it DHL to Poland. Now we have 2 Huskers, and these Huskers could handle like 10 ton an hour, but we weren't up to 10 ton an hour as far as the other end is concerned. Now we're using that side dump truck to dump in the potato conveyor that I found in their boneyard to feed the 2 Huskers. Here's me with a smile on my face. It's all working. I think I should go back there. I look thinner than I do now. Here's Alex again. And here's our operation. Now we've increased the operation. We're still outside, but we now have a Husker. I bought this Husker in Kewaunee for $18,000. That's a 16 roll or something roll Husker. The corn is husked by having 2 rollers with ribs on that revolve concurrently, and they'll grab the flag leaves of the cob and strip the leaves off the cob. And now we have capacity of 20 ton per hour. We have these 2 Huskers that I had before mounted here, and this one we bought in Kewaunee. I shipped it over there in a container, and I went over there and we installed it. Now we got an operation that's semi-automatic. We're running about 10 ton an hour. And here we were running cut corn and we were running cob corn. Now, when you run cob corn, you have to cook it. We'd cook it for 9 minutes, but then you have to cool it. So we'd try to do everything possible to cool the corn with evaporative cooling. In other words, using fine mist sprays that would, every time you'd evaporate a pound of water, you'd get rid of 1,000 BTUs. And then we put in this blancher. This blancher was located in the field in Cambria, Wisconsin. Fairwater, they no longer used it. So I went to the plant and I said, I'll give you $3,000 for that blancher. I said, okay. So can you imagine that blancher? We cut it in 3 pieces, shipped it over to Poland. I went over there and we had to have a sealed water lake coming in and going out. So we had to make a tank where the entrance to this conveyor would feed into the water. The corn would go into the water, into the blancher for 9 minutes and come out the same way. So there was little gutters all the way along here where the sides of the hood would fit into that gutter of water, which was your seal so that you wouldn't have steam coming out. Here's that cutter was, I think that blancher was about 50 feet long. You had to have a vivid imagination. I would go to the boneyards of our Larson Plants, and this was after I retired. And I had a good relationship with all the plant maintenance people. And I would go through the boneyards and I said, how much for that? How much for that? And I bought most of it at junk prices. Now, when you run food processing, you have a lot of 2-foot wide belt conveyors for transporting the corn between the pieces of equipment. And after you operate those belts for a couple of years, you get a frayed edge. And now the belt can't be used anymore. So I took all those belts that I could find. We had a whole pickup load full of belts, shipped it to Poland, put it on a table saw, cut 1 inch off each side of the belt. Now we have 22-inch conveyor belts. So we bought that all for nothing. Now this is a steamy deal. When you have the hot corn and you cool it with water, you're going to have some steam. And they basically, I gave them the concept and they basically put all this stuff together. But I still would go there a couple times a year to supervise it. Here's all these conveyors cooling the corn. Now we're going up into a tunnel. Now we freeze the corn with a tunnel. A tunnel is about 50 feet long, and it feeds the corn into it with a blast of cold air going through the corn, and we can freeze those cobs to a center temperature of about 32 degrees in 40 minutes or something like that. We could freeze our corn a lot faster. So this was all continuous. It wasn't just batch. And here they're coming out of the tunnel, frozen. They're hard enough you can drive a nail with the cob. Now we pick corn by hand, and now a friend of mine who helped me get all this equipment shipped over there, Steve Dvorak, he had a big implement business in Chilton, Wisconsin called D&D Equipment. So I would find this equipment and I said, Steve, I got a problem. I need some equipment hauled. He said, okay. So he would pick up the equipment. He put some money into this business. I didn't put any money into it. I did this all for donation. I just felt good about helping people that were behind the Iron Curtain from 1945 until 1989. Can you imagine that? Anyhow, we shipped this equipment, multi-row pickers and dump buggies. And in order to get it in the containers, we had to cut these big dump buggies in pieces. So we would cut them with a welder cutting torch and mark 112233. And when we got over to Poland, they would weld the pieces back together again. Here we're picking the corn, and now we're state of the art. They're doing the same thing in the US. We would pick 6 or 8 rows at a time, go up into a dump buggy and would dump that corn into a semi and haul in the plant. We are now running 16,000 ton of corn a year. In the first year, we ran 8 ton. Everybody likes a picture. So these Polish guys said, how about a picture? So we took a picture. Now we're really mechanized. We needed some more husking capacity. So a friend of mine called me. He said, there's a seed corn company in Waunakee that uses the same huskers that you're using, only they have metal rolls in to take the dry leaves off before they shell it. And this seed company was going out of business because the GSO seed, that modified seed, they couldn't produce. It was produced by, I think, Monsanto. So they were getting out of the business, and they had a bank of 3 of these huskers. Total cost of that husking line that they had must have been $500,000 with the conveyors and everything else. And I went down there and I offered him $25,000 for the whole works. He said, sold. So here we had 3 of those big huskers, all the conveying system, and it was a lot of conveying system. I called Steve. I said, I got a big project here. We got about 3 semi-loads of conveyors and huskers at Waunakee. Can you pick it up? He said, sure. So he went down there with skip loaders and semis and his crew, took all this stuff apart, loaded on the truck. We shipped about 4 containers full of equipment over to Poland, and then we installed it all. Now I said to Alex, you have to get a system where you feed the corn evenly into those huskers to get good production. if you do it on a batch basis, you're either on again or off again. So they bought this equipment in Hungary. You could dump a semi-load of corn in it, and on the bottom of this was a real slow-moving conveyor that you could adjust with a real fine-tuned dial, and that would feed the corn evenly into those huskers, so we'd have a even flow of corn all day long to keep the plant going. Now we got 3 of those big huskers, one of the other ones, and we were running 20 ton a day, sometime 24 hours a day. So now we're running 400 or 500 ton of corn a day. And here's the overhead view. You see the difference between that first scene where they're husking corn by hand. Here's two buyers from Kentucky Fried Chicken. Oh, and then the quality control person came from England. I said, would you like to go out to the field? She said, yes. Would you like to drive the harvester? Yes. So we put her in one of those great big corn pickers, and she'd never driven anything that big before. And it took her about 100 feet of roll before she got the thing oriented. But she went back to England with pictures of her driving the corn. We would do anything to establish our relationship. And here's this is Igor. He's the owner of the operation in Ukraine that I got involved with about 6 years later. Myself, Antic, and my son-in-law. I tried to get my son-in-law to take my place, but he found a bride here after my daughter died, and he didn't want to go. And here's Greg. He's the gopher, or the right-hand man. Every one of these people have to have a right-hand man. And Greg was a right-hand man of Igor. And of course, Antic and Bishek were the right-hand men of Alex. Oh, I got that woman there. I said, come on, get into the picture. I didn't even know who she was, but she stood in the picture. So I said, we have to have this beautified. I came there one year, and here Alex had got a marble sign that says, Roger Hubrecht, friend, and I don't know what it says. They had a Polish flag and an American flag on this. Pretty nice. And then when they rebuilt the building, they took it off, and that's pretty nice. That was my reward for working over there. And there's Antic with his son. All of these people, family members, were in our country. They stayed overnight at our house, and Antic would go to the pro shop and get Roger's gear. And now we're into, after 4 or 5 years, I said to Alex, I've helped you to get your feet on the ground. I'm going to help somebody else now. And I went to Bulgaria, and there was Theodore Ivanov and Alex Trenkov wanted to get in the corn business. And Alex Trenkov made arrangements to use a part of a communist-operated plant to produce canned corn. So I got a corn cutter and some other equipment, and we had 20 gypsies to pick the corn, and we produced, I don't know, about 15,000 cans of corn. I don't know what happened to Antic. I've lost track of him, or Alex. But the plant manager was a grandmother type of woman. She must have been 60, 65, and we hit it off real good together. She wanted to use me to get some business in the United States. They canned jams and jellies and all kinds of vegetables. And we had a nice time together discussing it. Nothing ever materialized as far as business. But 2 years later, I flew into Frankfurt, and in Europe, they don't take you to an air tunnel to get in the airport. They let you off on the tarmac, and then they take a bus and take you to the airport. You go one door for all the airplanes. And I was on this bus with a lot of other people and my new wife, who I'd married a year before. And I heard somebody say, Roger. And here comes this lady that I got to know in Bulgaria. She had her hair all done up. She was all dressed. She probably was at a conference, and she threw her arms around me. Oh, so good to see you. I looked at my wife and I said, what do I say? I didn't say anything, because anything I said she would think would be a lie. But my wife, who I married in 1996, traveled with me especially after that. To all the places we went, she was to Ukraine, to Bulgaria, to Poland several times. She was a good traveler. Anyhow, this Ukraine looked like a disaster. They had, I said to Igor, I said, would you like to get involved with Alex? Yes. I said, well, he's got a Husker and he no longer uses because we had bought the larger Huskers. And I called Alex and I said, would you like to get involved with Igor? He said, yes. So I said, fly down here and we'll work some arrangement out. So Alex flew from Warsaw down to Ukraine. And I said to Alex, you give Antic or Igor that Husker for 20% of his business, which I thought was nothing because it didn't look like a going business. So Alex said, okay. So he gave him that Husker and he took 20% of the business. And since that time, Alex has put more money into the business. He now owns 45% of the Ukrainian business and they have a good relationship going. Here's the women in Ukraine. It's not quite as sophisticated as in Poland. And they had a priest there to bless the operation. And here we grubbed a bunch of equipment together to make it run. But now he sent me a video. I don't have the video on here, but he has a state-of-the-art business with inkjet printers to put the date code on. And it really is a nice facility. And they've done that all. Oh, see how modern it is with the horses picking up corn husk and so forth, and me. They had one row pickers. That's not a US picker. They got that in Hungary or someplace. And that's some of our people intertwined with the Ukrainian people. Yeah, this is the plant now. Part of it. We just took short clips. We mechanized it. I just took short clips out of the video he sent me. Now this church in Brody, which is the town where Igor operated in, there was this church. And Alex called me back when we put this all together. He called me, he said, Roger, we have a problem, big problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, I called Igor and I said, where have you got that corn planted? Panvika? And Igor said, yes. How did you know? He said, Roger told me. I said, Alex, I didn't know where you had that corn planted. What'd you tell him that for? That's a lie. He said, well, that's all I could think of so fast. I said, what's the problem with him knowing where he had the corn planted? Well, he said, my grandpa owned the land where Igor is growing corn now. And now Igor is going to think that I'm trying to get his land back. What do? I said, tell him the truth. I said, you tell him the truth and you'll laugh about it and you'll go on your way. He told him what happened and that's what happened. Now, the rest of the story. Alex's grandfather was a fairly wealthy farmer in what is now Ukraine, but was Poland in World War II. And Alex's grandfather had quite a bit of land, and some townspeople were accused of stealing sticks and wood and potatoes from Alex's grandfather. And they took the people to court, and Alex's grandfather said, they need it more than I do. Don't punish them. So they released the people. Subsequent to that, the communists captured Alex's grandfather, who were going to kill him. They had a court trial, and he was a market economy guy, and they were communists. And they took him to court, and the townspeople came in and said, he's a good man. You shouldn't do anything to him. So they let him go. And Alex's grandfather came into this church and prayed that he wouldn't be captured by the Russians again. And he succeeded in getting away. Now, this building had been converted into a granary because the Russians destroyed all the churches. And Alex found out about this church. And he went down to Brody and hired a guy to restucco the whole building. They redid the whole inside. And Alex paid for all of that himself. Now, in this building, they had interred, that's what they did in those days. They would inter dead people in the basement of these churches, but they had taken the bodies out because they were afraid the Russians were going to destroy the whole deal. Subsequent to that, Alex is trying to find the bodies back so he can reinter them into that building. It's quite a story because I've been in this building and to see how I got involved with Igor, and there was no connection between Igor and Alex, and to find out that Alex's grandfather was in that building. So it made my heart pretty warm to hear that. And now Antec has a going business. He has 165 employees. He's owned 43% by Alex. He cans peas and corn and other products. And we have got combines involved with him and so forth. And he has a successful operation, and the Polish operation has 800 people working. Not all of it on corn. They're making cabbage rolls and beef rolls and cherries and strawberries and everything else. But the corn on the cob gave Alex the seed money to develop his other businesses. And they have a profitable business now with 800 people working. In 1993, you could see what we had. We had 20 people working in the plant. So it makes me feel good. Now, the people in Bulgaria, Boca, the company the government agency that sent me over there to help Alex, said, would you escort a group of 8 entrepreneurs in the US to show them food processing operations? And in a weak moment, I said yes. And can you imagine? I went to Chicago, picked them up met them at the airport. We flew to California. Boca had hired a van and a driver, and we had 2 interpreters. And I had this group of Bulgarians for a week. And Bulgarians like to have fun. When they have a top soccer tournament, the news people always follow the Bulgarians around because they have the most fun. So that was a very stressful thing for me, but we got through it. We took them to Martinelli Cider Company. I took them to the NFPA, National Food Processors Laboratories. I took them to a food show, took them to a mushroom operation. I took them to the NFP, National Food Processors Labs out there to teach them how to run vegetables and other products. Now, I arranged to have somebody from the National Food Processors go to Bulgaria with a team that taught these people HACCP, that's Hazard Analysis of Critical Control Points. That's an acronym for doing everything right when you're processing vegetables. So they came there and conducted a seminar for a couple of weeks with the people there. And I told people, and this was funny, I told the people in Bulgaria, I said, you should have an association. I said, each throw in $100 and form an association so you can have some mass and strength behind what you want as far as labeling is concerned. So later on that day, Alex Trenkov said to me, we're having a meeting tomorrow. I said, what's the meeting about? He said, to form an association. I said, who's going to be talking? He said, you are. So here, the next day I had 20 entrepreneurs in there, had an interpreter, and I was telling him how to form an association for which I didn't know much about. But it worked out okay. I mean, I had interpreters interpreting for me, and they hired an attorney part-time, and they each threw in $100, and they formed their association. And that basically covers my operation there. I'm still working with the people in Ukraine and in Poland, but it's now by phone. And Antec came to visit Linda and me before she passed away, February 19th. He spent about 3 hours with us, and Linda, who was suffering from dementia, still recognized him. I said to Antec, are you coming out for my funeral? He said, yes, Roger, but don't worry, very few people die in their 90s. So that pretty well takes care of it. Is that all right? But,
Yeah, that should be perfect.
that's something on the church.
Yeah.